My stepdad told me to get off his property during a BBQ because I disagreed with his politics. My house, my rules. I reminded him that the house is in my name and he pays zero rent. He laughed and said I wouldn't dare. I served him a 30-day eviction notice with dessert. Hey, Reddit. So my stepdad told me to leave his property during a family BBQ because I had the audacity to disagree with his political opinions. He puffed up his chest like some kind of suburban warlord and hit me with the classic "my house, my rules." One small problem. The house is literally in my name. He pays zero rent, zero utilities, zero property taxes, and apparently zero attention to legal documents. When I reminded him of this minor detail, he laughed in my face and said I wouldn't dare do anything about it. So I served him a 30-day eviction notice right there with the apple pie. He stopped laughing real quick. Let me give you guys some background, because this story requires context to fully appreciate. I'm Jason, 32 male, and I've been dealing with my stepdad Doug, 58 male, for about 15 years now. He married my mom when I was 17, right after my biological father passed away from a heart attack. My dad was a quiet, hardworking man who spent 25 years as a senior accountant at a regional firm. He wasn't flashy, didn't drive expensive cars or wear designer clothes, but he was smart with money, really smart. The kind of guy who maxed out his retirement contributions, invested in index funds, and paid off the house by the time he was 45. When Dad died, he left everything to me and my mom. The house was paid off, there was life insurance, some investments, and a small inheritance from my grandparents that he'd never touched. Mom was devastated. They'd been married since college, and suddenly she was alone at 42 with a teenage son and no idea how to manage finances, because Dad had always handled everything. Enter Doug. He swooped in about 8 months after the funeral. They'd met at some grief support group, which should have been my first red flag. Not that grief support is bad, but Doug was there for his second wife who'd passed away 3 years earlier. 3 years. Dude was still attending meetings long after most people had moved on. In hindsight, I think he was trolling for vulnerable widows. Doug was the opposite of my father in every way. Loud where Dad was quiet. Flashy where Dad was practical. Opinionated where Dad was thoughtful. He drove a lifted truck he couldn't really afford, wore clothes with visible logos, and had strong opinions about everything from sports to politics to how other people should live their lives. The man had never met a topic he didn't think he was an expert on. My mom, still grieving and lonely, fell for his confident act. Within 6 months, they were engaged. Within a year, they were married. I was 18 by then and about to start college, so I figured whatever. She's an adult. Her life, her choice. I didn't like Doug, but I didn't have to live with him full-time anymore. Here's where things get interesting from a legal standpoint. Before my dad died, he'd set up the house in a specific way. The property was held in a trust, with me as the primary beneficiary. Mom had lifetime residency rights, meaning she could live there as long as she wanted, but she couldn't sell it, mortgage it, or transfer ownership without my consent. Dad had done this specifically because he worried about what might happen if Mom remarried. He never said it out loud, but I found a letter in his files after he passed that explained his reasoning. He'd seen too many widows lose everything to new husbands who turned out to be financial parasites. Smart man, my father. Smarter than any of us realized at the time. So when Mom married Doug, she moved him into a house that wasn't really hers to give. She had the right to live there, and she could invite whoever she wanted as a guest, but Doug had no legal claim to the property whatsoever. None. The deed was in my name through the trust. The property taxes came to me. The homeowner's insurance was in my name. Did I mention any of this to Doug? No. Did my mom? Apparently not. She probably didn't fully understand the legal arrangement herself, and I wasn't about to explain it to a guy I didn't trust. So Doug moved in, started calling it his house, and nobody corrected him. For years, this arrangement worked fine. I finished college, got a degree in civil engineering, and landed a good job at a firm that designs bridges and infrastructure projects. I moved to the other side of town, got my own apartment, and only visited for holidays and occasional family dinners. Doug and I maintained a tense but civil relationship. He'd make comments about my lifestyle choices, my career, my dating life, whatever he felt like criticizing that day. I'd smile, nod, and leave as soon as politely possible. Mom seemed happy enough, so I kept my mouth shut and my opinions to myself. Let me give you some examples of what living with Doug was like for my mom. The man had rules about everything. The thermostat had to be at exactly 68 degrees year-round because that was the optimal temperature for human productivity. Never mind that my mom ran cold and wore sweaters inside during summer because the air conditioning made her uncomfortable. The TV was always tuned to his preferred channels, and if Mom wanted to watch something else, She had to wait until Doug was out of the house or asleep. Dinner had to be ready at exactly 6:30 p.m. Not 6:25, not 6:35, exactly 6:30, because Doug believed in discipline and routine. He controlled the grocery shopping, the household budget, the social calendar. My mom had to ask permission to invite her own friends over to the house that she legally had the right to live in. And if Doug didn't like those friends, he'd make the visit so uncomfortable that they wouldn't come back. Over the years, Mom's social circle shrank to almost nothing. I noticed this happening in slow motion, but felt powerless to do anything about it. Every time I tried to bring it up with Mom, she'd defend Doug or change the subject. She'd been with my dad for 23 years in a partnership of equals, and now she was living like a guest in her own home, walking on eggshells around a man who controlled every aspect of daily life. The financial stuff bothered me too. Doug had a pension from his previous job, Social Security, and some savings. Not a fortune, but enough to contribute to household expenses. Did he? Of course not. He considered his money, his, and the house expenses covered by the property situation, whatever that meant. My mom's modest income from part-time work at a local boutique went almost entirely to groceries and household supplies, while Doug's pension funded his hobbies, his truck payments, and his weekend golf outings. I calculated once that over 14 years, Doug had essentially received free housing worth probably $200,000 or more in equivalent rent, not including utilities, property taxes, insurance, and maintenance, all of which came from the trust that my father had set up and funded. Doug was basically living off my dead father's generosity while acting like he was the provider. Then Doug retired 3 years ago, and everything got worse. With nothing to do all day, Doug became insufferable. He started watching cable news 12 hours a day, joined various online groups for concerned citizens, and developed increasingly extreme opinions about pretty much everything. Politics, social issues, economics, you name it. He became one of those guys who could turn any conversation into a rant about whatever was making him angry that day. Family dinners became minefields. I learned to never mention current events, never discuss anything remotely political, never express any opinion that might contradict whatever Doug had absorbed from his echo chamber that week. Even neutral topics could somehow spiral into arguments. I once mentioned that I was excited about a new high-speed rail project my firm might be involved with, and Doug spent 45 minutes explaining why public transportation was some kind of conspiracy. I just wanted to talk about engineering. The man made it exhausting. My mom started looking tired. She'd try to change subjects, smooth over arguments, keep the peace. I noticed she'd stopped expressing her own opinions about anything. She'd just nod along with whatever Doug said, then give me apologetic looks when he wasn't watching. I asked her once if she was okay. Really okay. She said Doug was just passionate, and she'd learned to let things go. That broke my heart a little, but what could I do? She was an adult making her own choices. Then came the BBQ. It was 4th of July weekend, and Mom had organized what she called a family reunion barbecue. Extended family, neighbors, some of Mom's friends from her book club, maybe 30 people total, all gathered in the backyard of the house that, again, legally belongs to me. Doug was in his element. He'd set himself up at the grill like he was commanding a military operation, loudly announcing his opinions on the proper way to cook various meats while dismissing anyone else's input. He was 3 sodas deep and feeling chatty, which was never a good combination. I was sitting at one of the folding tables with my cousin Brian and his wife, trying to have a normal conversation about Brian's new job. Doug wandered over, spatula in hand, and inserted himself into our discussion. "You know what the problem is with this country?" he announced, as if anyone had asked. We all exchanged those resigned looks that family members share when they know what's coming. Doug launched into a tirade about various political issues. I won't bore you with the details because honestly, the specific politics don't matter. What matters is that he was loudly expressing some pretty extreme views in front of 30 guests, many of whom clearly disagreed based on their uncomfortable expressions. I watched my aunt shift uncomfortably in her lawn chair. My cousin Brian's wife suddenly became very interested in her potato salad. Mrs. Patterson from 3 doors down, who'd known my father for 20 years, was staring at the ground like she wished it would swallow her whole. Doug didn't notice any of this. He never did. The man had the self-awareness of a brick wall. I tried to stay quiet. I really did. But then Doug said something that was just factually wrong, not a matter of opinion, but an actual misstatement of basic facts about how certain government programs work. As a civil engineer who works on infrastructure projects, I happen to know quite a bit about how government funding and oversight actually functions, so I politely corrected him. Actually, Doug, that's not quite how it works. The funding mechanism is structured differently. I can explain if you're interested. I said it calmly, respectfully even. I wasn't trying to embarrass him or start a fight. I just wanted to correct a factual error that he was loudly broadcasting to everyone at the party. Doug's face went red. He doesn't like being corrected. Never has. Oh, here we go, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The college boy thinks he knows more than everyone else. Typical. I'm not saying I know more than everyone. I'm just saying that the specific thing you described isn't how the process actually works. I deal with this stuff professionally. You deal with building bridges. You don't know anything about the real issue. Infrastructure funding is literally my job, Doug. He puffed up like a territorial bird. Some of the guests were watching now, and I could see a few of them trying to pretend they weren't listening. You know what your problem is? Doug said, pointing at me with his spatula. You think because you went to college and got some fancy degree that you're better than hardworking Americans who actually built this country, I sighed. I never said anything like that. I'm just telling you that what you said about the funding structure was incorrect. No, you're disrespecting me. In my own home. In front of everyone. And there it was. The phrase that started everything. Your home? I said, keeping my voice level. That's right. My home. My backyard. My rules. And my rule is that nobody disrespects me at my own barbecue. So if you can't show some respect, you can get off my property. I stared at him. My mom had appeared at the edge of the patio, looking panicked. Brian and his wife were frozen in their seats. A few of the neighbors had stopped pretending not to watch. Doug, just to be clear, you're telling me to leave your property because I corrected a factual error? I'm telling you to leave because you don't know your place. This is my house. I'm the man of this family, and I won't be contradicted by some know-it-all kid. I was 32 years old. The kid comment was particularly grating. My mom rushed over. Doug, honey, let's just calm down and enjoy the party. No, Linda. I'm tired of tiptoeing around his feelings. He thinks he can come into my house and tell me I'm wrong. Not happening. Not anymore. Doug, I said slowly, whose name do you think is on the deed to this house? He laughed. Actually laughed in my face. What? Mine and Linda's, obviously. We've lived here for 14 years. Have you ever actually seen the deed? He sputtered. I don't need to see some piece of paper. I live here. I've lived here for over a decade. This is my home. Actually, the property is held in a trust established by my father. The deed is in my name. Has been since Dad died. You don't own this house, Doug. You don't even rent it. You live here because I allow it. Rent-free, I might add. You haven't contributed a single dollar toward the mortgage, the property taxes, or the homeowner's insurance because there is no mortgage, and I pay the taxes and insurance. Doug's face went through several colors. Red, then pale, then red again. That's ridiculous. Linda, tell him that's ridiculous. My mom looked like she wanted the ground to swallow her whole. Doug, she said quietly. He's right. The house was in David's trust. It passed to Jason when David died. I have the right to live here, but I don't own it. You never told me that. I didn't think it mattered. We live here. We take care of it. I didn't think... You didn't think? Doug's voice was rising. You let me believe this was our house for 14 years? It is our home. It's just not technically... Doug turned back to me, his face now settled on a deep, angry red. So what? You think because of some legal technicality you can just kick us out? That's insane. No court would allow it. We've lived here for 14 years. That establishes residency, rights. He had a point about tenancy rights, actually. Even without a formal lease, long-term residents have certain protection. But those protections didn't give him ownership, and they certainly didn't let him kick me off my property. I'm not talking about kicking you out, I said. I'm pointing out that you're standing in the backyard of a house you don't own, telling the actual owner to leave. The irony is pretty thick, don't you think? This is insane. You're insane. Linda, your son is insane. Doug, please, let's just... No! I want him off my property. Now! He's not welcome here anymore. I stood up from the table. Several guests were openly staring now. Fine, I'll leave. But Doug, you might want to remember this conversation the next time you think about whose house this really is. Because if I'm not welcome in my own home, then maybe we need to have a serious discussion about who actually is welcome. I left, walked right out, got in my car, and drove home. My phone started blowing up before I even got there. Mom calling, texting, apologizing, my aunt calling to ask what happened. Brian texting to say that was intense. I ignored all of it for the rest of the evening. I needed to think. The next morning, I made some decisions. First, I called my attorney. She's a real estate lawyer who had helped me with some property investments, and she confirmed what I already knew. Doug was a tenant at will at best. He had no lease, paid no rent, and had no legal claim to the property beyond the fact that he lived there with someone who had residency rights. I could evict him with 30 days' notice, standard procedure for month-to-month tenancies or guests who have overstayed. What about my mom? I asked. She has lifetime residency rights per the trust. You can't evict her, and honestly, you probably wouldn't want to. But Doug, he's just her guest, and guests can be asked to leave. I spent a week thinking about it. Part of me wanted to cool off and let it blow over, but then I started hearing from family members about what Doug was saying behind my back. According to my cousin Brian, Doug was telling everyone at the BBQ that I was mentally unstable and had threatened him. He was spinning the whole thing to make himself look like the victim. He told my aunt that I'd tried to steal the house from my poor mother and that he was protecting her from my greed. My mom called me 3 days after the BBQ crying. She apologized for Doug's behavior, said he was just stressed, asked if I could please just let it go. She said he'd promised to apologize if I came over for dinner. I went. Against my better judgment, I went. Doug's idea of an apology was something like, "I'm sorry you got upset about what I said. I was just expressing my opinions, and you took it too personally. But I accept your apology for disrespecting me, and we can move on." I literally laughed. "I'm sorry, what? You accept my apology?" "Yeah, for correcting me in front of everyone. That was embarrassing." "Doug, you told me to get off my own property." "Our property. Our home. It's not your property. We established that. The deed is in my name." "Yeah, on paper maybe. But morally, ethically, this is the home I've lived in for 14 years. I've mowed this lawn, fixed the gutters, maintained everything. I've earned the right to call it mine. You've earned nothing. You don't pay rent. You don't pay taxes. You don't pay insurance. You contribute nothing financially to this property. I contribute my labor, my expertise. I'm the man of this house." My mom was sitting there wringing her hands, looking miserable. "Doug," I said, suddenly very calm, "I'm going to ask you one time. Will you apologize sincerely for telling me to leave my own property and acknowledge that you don't own this house?" He crossed his arms. "No, because I have nothing to apologize for. You were the one being disrespectful, and I don't care what some piece of paper says. This is my home, and as far as I'm concerned, you're just the landlord, and a pretty terrible one, demanding apologies from your own family." "Okay," I said. "Okay." I left. The next day, I called my attorney again and told her to prepare the eviction paperwork. 30-day notice to vacate, addressed to Douglas Palmer, delivered properly and legally. My attorney asked if I was sure. I said yes. She asked about my mom. I explained that Mom wasn't being evicted, just Doug. Mom could stay as long as she wanted, but Doug had to go. The paperwork was ready in 2 days. Now came the question of delivery. I could have sent it by certified mail. I could have had a process server deliver it. But honestly, after what Doug had said and done, I wanted to see his face. 2 Saturdays after the BBQ, I showed up at the house unannounced. Mom was surprised but happy to see me. Doug was in his recliner watching his usual programming. "Jason, what a nice surprise. Are you staying for dinner?" "Actually, Mom, I brought dessert." I held up the apple pie I'd picked up from the bakery. Mom took it to the kitchen while I sat down in the living room. Doug barely acknowledged me, just grunted and kept watching his show. "How's it going, Doug?" "Fine." "House treating you well?" He finally looked at me, suspicious. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing, just making conversation." "Hey, can you turn that off for a second? I have something for you." He muted the TV, looking annoyed. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the envelope, handed it to him. "What's this?" "Open it." He tore open the envelope and pulled out the papers. I watched his face as he read. The confusion, the disbelief, then the rage. "What is this?" "That's a 30-day notice to vacate. You have until August 15th to find a new place to live. After that date, if you're still here, I'll begin formal eviction proceedings through the court." "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious." My mom came back from the kitchen. "What's going on?" Doug threw the papers at her. "Your son is trying to kick me out. He's evicting me from my own home." Mom read the papers, her face going pale. "Jason, you can't do this. This is our home. It's your home, Mom. You have the right to live here as long as you want. That right is protected in the trust. But Doug doesn't have the same protection. He's not on the deed. He's not in the trust. He doesn't pay rent. Legally, he's just a guest. And after what happened at the BBQ, he's a guest who's worn out his welcome. This is insane." Doug was on his feet now. "You can't just throw me out because you got your feelings hurt." "I'm not throwing you out because my feelings got hurt. I'm removing a tenant who told me I wasn't welcome in my own home. You said I could get off your property, remember? Well, turns out it's not your property, so now you can get off mine. No court will enforce this. We'll fight it. I'll hire a lawyer. Go ahead. Any lawyer will tell you the same thing. You have no lease. You pay no rent. You have no legal claim to this property beyond your marriage to my mother, and spousal rights don't override the terms of my father's trust. You're month to month at best, and I'm giving you notice." Doug turned to my mom. Linda, tell him to stop this. Tell him he can't do this to your husband. My mom was crying now. Jason, please. I know he was wrong, but this is too much. Where will he go? That's his problem to figure out. He's got 30 days. That's more notice than most people get. He can find an apartment, move in with family, whatever he needs to do, but he's not staying here. Doug got in my face. You ungrateful little punk. After everything I've done for this family, after all the years I spent taking care of your mother, keeping this house running, being a father figure to you, this is how you repay me? Father figure? I actually laughed. Doug, you've never been anything close to a father figure. You've been a house guest who criticized everything I did, mooched off my father's house, and spent the last 15 years acting like you owned a property you never contributed to. My father built this. My father paid for it. My father made sure it would be protected. You just showed up after he died and moved in. I married your mother. That means something. It means you married my mother. It doesn't mean you own her house. It doesn't mean you get to tell the property owner to leave. And it doesn't mean I have to tolerate being disrespected in my own home by someone who lives there rent-free. Doug looked like he wanted to hit me. I almost wished he would. It would have made the eviction a lot simpler. Instead, he grabbed the eviction notice off the floor and tore it in half. There. Problem solved. I'm not going anywhere. I smiled. That's your copy. My attorney has the original, filed with the county clerk. Tearing up the paper doesn't change anything. You've been served. I turned to my mom. Mom, I love you. You're welcome to stay here as long as you want. That will never change. But Doug has to go. This is my decision, and it's final. I left. Behind me, I could hear Doug shouting and my mom crying. It wasn't pleasant, but it was necessary. The next few weeks were chaos. Doug initially refused to believe the eviction was real. He consulted a lawyer friend, who apparently told him exactly what my attorney had told me. He had no legal claim to the property, and the eviction was valid. He tried calling me to negotiate, but his idea of negotiation was alternating between threats and guilt trips. You're destroying your mother's life, he said in one voicemail. She'll never forgive you for this. I know people, he said in another. You think you can just push me out? You have no idea who you're messing with. That one made me laugh. What people? His buddies from the golf course? Please. He also started a campaign to turn family members against me. He called my aunt 3 times in 1 week, each time with a different story about how I was mentally unstable and taking advantage of my mother. He told my uncle that I had forged documents to steal the house. He even called my grandmother, who's 86 and doesn't need this kind of stress, to tell her that I was robbing my own mother blind. My grandmother, bless her heart, called me right after and said, Jason, I've known you since you were born, and I've known Doug for 14 years. I believe you. That man has always been too big for his britches. Have I mentioned how much I love my grandmother? The best part was when Doug tried to rally support from the neighbors. He went door to door on the street, telling everyone that I was a cruel, heartless son who was throwing his poor stepfather out on the streets. Most of the neighbors had known my father, had watched me grow up, and weren't buying what Doug was selling. Mrs. Patterson from 3 doors down actually called me to say she'd never liked Doug and was glad someone was finally putting him in his place. He tried getting other family members to intervene. My aunt called me to ask if there was any way to work this out. I explained the situation, and she said she understood, but wished there was another way. My cousin Brian called to say he supported me completely and that Doug had been insufferable at family events for years. The best call came from my Uncle Pete, my dad's brother, who I hadn't talked to in months. Jason, I heard what's going on. I just want you to know your father would be proud of you. Really? This feels like a pretty aggressive move. Your father set up that trust specifically because he didn't want some guy to come along and take advantage of your mother. He predicted this exact scenario. He told me once that if Linda remarried, he wanted to make sure the house stayed in the family. He didn't want her getting pressured into selling, and he didn't want some new husband taking what he'd built. You're doing exactly what David wanted. That conversation meant more to me than I can express. My mom tried multiple times to get me to reconsider. She showed up at my apartment crying. She called me at work. She sent long emails about how Doug was sorry, how he'd change, how I was breaking up their marriage. She even got my aunt to call me on her behalf. My Aunt Karen, who I've always been close to, tried to explain that Doug was from a different generation and didn't mean things the way they sounded. I told Aunt Karen that Doug was from the same generation as my father, and my father never told me to get off my own property or laughed in my face when I pointed out basic facts. Being from a certain generation doesn't excuse being a terrible person. The most frustrating conversation was with my mom's best friend Patricia, who called me one evening to help me see reason. Patricia explained that Doug was really struggling with feeling like he'd lost control of his life, and that maybe I could show some compassion. Patricia, I said, Doug has had 14 years of free housing. He's contributed nothing financially while acting like he owns the place. He told me, the actual owner, to leave my own property. And when I pointed out that I own the house, he laughed and said I wouldn't dare do anything about it. What part of that deserves my compassion? Patricia didn't have an answer for that. I felt bad for her. I really did. But I'd also seen how tired she looked at every family gathering, how she'd stopped expressing opinions, how she walked on eggshells around Doug. Part of me hoped this might actually be good for her in the long run. On day 25, Doug still hadn't moved out. He was calling my bluff, convinced I wouldn't actually go through with a court eviction. He was wrong. On day 31, I filed the formal eviction proceedings. The court date was set for 3 weeks later. That's when Doug finally started to take this seriously. He hired an actual attorney this time, not just a friend who happened to be a lawyer. His attorney sent mine a letter requesting a meeting to discuss a resolution. My attorney advised me to at least hear them out. We met at my attorney's office. Doug, his lawyer, me, and my lawyer. Doug walked in like he owned the place. Same as always. Classic Doug. He was wearing his best golf polo and khakis, like he was showing up for a country club meeting instead of a legal negotiation about his impending homelessness. He didn't look at me, just sat down, crossed his arms, and stared at the wall. His attorney was a younger guy, maybe mid-30s, who looked like he'd drawn the short straw at his firm and gotten stuck with this case. He kept glancing at Doug like he was already regretting his life choices. Doug's attorney laid out their position. Doug had been a tenant for 14 years, had invested labor and resources into maintaining the property, and deserved compensation if he was going to be forced out. Compensation for what exactly? My attorney asked. For the improvements Mr. Palmer has made to the property over the years. The landscaping, the maintenance, the upgrades to various systems. Does Mr. Palmer have receipts for these alleged improvements? He did not. Of course he didn't. Furthermore, his attorney continued, we believe the eviction is being pursued in bad faith as retaliation for a personal disagreement. Mr. Palmer has done nothing to warrant removal from his home. I spoke up. His home? He doesn't own the home. He doesn't pay rent. He doesn't pay property taxes. He told me, the actual owner, to get off his property. When I pointed out that I own the property, he laughed in my face and said I wouldn't dare do anything about it. Well, I dared. Now he can deal with the consequences. Doug's attorney looked uncomfortable. I got the sense he hadn't gotten the full story from his client. My attorney presented her case. The trust documents, the deed in my name, records showing 0 rent payments, 0 property tax contributions from Doug, nothing. She also presented the timeline of events, including signed witness statements from 3 people who were at the BBQ confirming what Doug had said. Doug's attorney asked for a recess to speak with his client. When they came back, the attorney's demeanor had changed. Mr. Palmer is willing to vacate the property within 60 days if Mr. Wallace will agree not to pursue him for any back rent or damages. Wait, his attorney just called me Mr. Wallace? That was awkward since my name is definitely not Wallace. Everyone looked confused for a second before his attorney apologized for the mix-up. Apparently he was working another eviction case and got his clients confused. Real professional. Anyway, I considered the offer. 60 days was longer than I wanted, but it would avoid a potentially messy court battle. 45 days, I countered, and he stays away from family events where I'm present for the next 2 years? Doug started to protest, but his attorney put a hand on his arm. We can agree to 45 days. The family event restriction is unusual, but if it avoids further conflict, Mr. Palmer will comply. We signed the agreement that afternoon. Doug was out of the house 43 days later. He moved into an apartment across town, which I'm told is significantly smaller and significantly less nice than the house he'd been living in rent-free for 14 years. My mom stayed in the house. I told her she could live there as long as she wanted. No strings attached. She cried and thanked me and said she was sorry for everything. Here's the update everyone's been waiting for. It's been 6 months since Doug moved out. My mom is doing better than I expected. The first few weeks were rough, but around week 3 I stopped by the house and found her rearranging furniture. She'd moved Doug's recliner to the garage and replaced it with a reading chair from an estate sale. The TV was off. Music was playing. I hadn't heard music in that house since my father was alive. Over the following weeks, she started reconnecting with friends she'd lost touch with. Her college roommate visited. Her sister flew in from Colorado. The women from her old book club reached out and invited her back. She joined art classes at the community center, something Doug had called a waste of money. She set up a little studio in the spare bedroom. Her first painting was terrible, but she was so proud of it that I framed it and hung it in my apartment. Doug, meanwhile, crashed and burned. From what I hear through the family grapevine, his new apartment flooded 3 weeks after he moved in. Burst pipe in the unit above him. destroyed most of his furniture and electronics. Insurance covered some of it, but he'd cheaped out on renter's insurance, so he ate most of the loss. Had to sleep on an air mattress for 2 weeks while he waited for replacement furniture to arrive. Then he got rear-ended at a stoplight. His truck was in the shop for 6 weeks. The other driver's insurance covered it, but Doug had to take Ubers everywhere because he'd let his AAA membership lapse. Spent over $800 on rides in those 6 weeks alone. His apartment complex also hit him with a fine for violating the noise ordinance. Apparently, he'd been watching his cable news programs at maximum volume late at night, and the neighbors complained. The property manager sent him a warning letter, and when he ignored it, they fined him $300. He tried to fight it and lost. My mom filed for divorce about 2 months after he moved out. Doug tried to claim half of everything, including the house. His attorney had to explain again that he had no claim to a property held in trust that predated the marriage. The judge actually laughed during one of the hearings when Doug's lawyer tried to argue he'd invested sweat equity into a home he'd lived in rent-free. The divorce finalized last month. Doug walked away with his personal belongings, his truck, and about $12,000 from their joint savings account. That was it. 14 years of marriage, and he got less than 1 year of rent would have cost him. Best part? Remember his golf buddies he was always bragging about? Turns out they were more interested in using his backyard for summer cookouts than in his actual friendship. Once he moved to the apartment with no yard and no grill, the invitations stopped coming. I heard from my cousin that Doug tried to organize a golf outing last month, and only 2 people showed up. Last month, Doug made one final play. He showed up at my mom's house unannounced, flowers in hand, talking about reconciliation and starting fresh. My mom called me while he was still on the porch. I drove over. Doug was sitting on the front steps looking pathetic when I pulled up. "She doesn't want to talk to you," I said. "This is between me and Linda." "No, this is you trespassing on my property. Again. You want me to call the cops or are you going to leave?" He left the flowers on the porch and drove away. My mom threw them in the trash. 2 weeks later, I got a LinkedIn notification. Doug had viewed my profile. Then I got a friend request on Facebook. Then a text from an unknown number asking if we could grab coffee and clear the air. I blocked everything. My mom is thriving now. She joined a hiking group, started volunteering at an animal shelter, and last week she told me she went on a coffee date with a guy from her art class. Said it was nice to talk to someone who actually listened when she spoke. The house looks different these days. Mom repainted the living room, replaced the old curtains Doug had picked out, put up some of her paintings. It feels like a home again, instead of a bunker. She's hosting Thanksgiving this year, first time in over a decade. She already sent out invitations to family members Doug had driven away over the year. My aunt is coming. My cousin Brian and his wife. Even my grandmother, who's 86 and doesn't travel much anymore, said she wouldn't miss it. Doug wasn't invited, obviously. Last I heard, he's trying to sell his truck to cover some credit card debt he racked up furnishing his apartment. The same truck he used to park in my father's driveway like he owned the place. Funny how things work out. So that's my story, Reddit. Doug told me to get off his property. I reminded him it was my property. He laughed and said I wouldn't dare do anything about it. 6 months later, he's living in a flood-damaged apartment, driving a truck he can't afford, divorced, and trying to sell his prized possession to pay off debt. I dared. Guys, we are so close to hit 100,000 subscribers on this channel. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. It really helps hit that 100,000 mark. Thanks for making this dream come true.